The deadliest famine in human history wasn't caused by drought or flood or war. It was caused by a bird the size of your fist, and the man who tried to stop it spent years cleaning public toilets. This is what happens when you remove something nobody thought mattered. The Eurasian tree sparrow weighs about 25 grams, wingspan roughly 20 centimeters. It eats grain. It eats insects. It nests in rooftops and barn rafters and the gaps between bricks and city walls. It is by every measure an unremarkable animal, the kind of creature that exists in such numbers and such familiarity that most people stop seeing it entirely. It is background noise. Furniture. A bird so ordinary it barely registers. That ordinariness is what made it so dangerous to underestimate. In 1958, someone did the math. A single sparrow consumes approximately 4 or 5 kilograms of grain per year. China had hundreds of millions of sparrows. The arithmetic was straightforward. Kill the sparrows, save the grain, feed the people. The slogan was, man must conquer nature. The logic seemed unassailable. It was missing one variable. Zheng Zuoxin was an ornithologist at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. He had spent his career studying birds, including specifically the sparrow. He had trained in the United States, returned to China, and built what would eventually become the country's foundational body of ornithological research. When the campaign was announced, he did not make speeches. He did not write editorials. He went to the laboratory and cut sparrows open. Zhang and his colleagues performed autopsies on dead sparrows collected from across China. They examined stomach contents under magnification. What they found was not what the campaign assumed. 3/4 of each sparrow's stomach contents were insects, crop-destroying insects, locusts, aphids, caterpillars. 1/4 was grain. The sparrow wasn't feeding on the harvest. It was, every day, quietly consuming the things that would have consumed the harvest. Zhang submitted his findings to the government. He petitioned. He repeated his warnings through official channels. He was labeled a counter-revolutionary. The campaign was already underway. Nobody wanted to hear it. What followed was one of the largest coordinated mobilizations of human effort in recorded history, aimed at an animal that weighed less than a mobile phone. Schools were let out. Factories paused. Government agencies, farms, and city blocks were all given quotas. The method was simple: exhaustion. A sparrow can remain airborne for roughly 15 minutes before it must land or die. Citizens took to rooftops and fields and city streets with drums and pots and gongs and firecrackers, making continuous noise. So the birds couldn't land, couldn't rest, couldn't stop flying. Eyewitnesses who were children at the time recall it as something almost festive. There were rewards for the highest kill counts. Schools competed. Children banged pots with the enthusiasm of a game. The birds fell from the sky, not shot, not poisoned, dead from exhaustion, dropping from trees and telephone wires onto the streets below. Nests were torn down. Eggs were smashed. Fledglings that couldn't yet fly were killed where they sat. In Shanghai alone, over 1 to 3 million sparrows were killed in 2 days. Across China, at least 200 million sparrows were killed in 1958. Some estimates place the number above 1 billion. By 1959, the sparrow was functionally gone from China. The slogan had said, "Man must conquer nature." Nature, as it turned out, had terms of its own. The fields were quieter without the sparrows. At first, this felt like progress. Then the insects came. With no natural predators, locust populations surged across agricultural regions that had for centuries been kept in check by the very bird that was now absent. Aphids multiplied unchecked. Caterpillars stripped leaves from crops that had survived the sparrow campaign without a scratch. The grain that was supposed to benefit from the sparrow's absence was being devoured, not from above by birds, but from the ground up, by everything the birds had been silently holding back. Crop production dropped 15% in 1959, then it kept dropping. By 1960, some regions reported yield declines of up to 70%. The famine that followed lasted from 1959 to 1961. Between 15 and 55 million people died. The most credible estimates cluster around 30 million. The largest famine in human history, measured in absolute numbers. Zhang's autopsies had been right. 3/4 insects, 1/4 grain. He had said so in 1958. He had the evidence. He had the data. Nobody with the authority to stop it had been willing to listen. In late 1959, the Chinese Academy of Sciences formally presented Zheng's findings to leadership. The sparrow was quietly removed from the list of 4 pests. No announcement, no public acknowledgement of what had happened. Bedbugs took its place on the list. There was no apology, no exoneration. An official admission would have required someone to accept responsibility, and no one was prepared to do that. The government eventually imported sparrows from the Soviet Union to replenish what had been destroyed. The ecological balance, slowly, over years, began to recover. For Zhang Zuoxin, the vindication that arrived in 1959 did not end the consequences. When the Cultural Revolution came in the late 1960s, his home was searched. His books and research materials were confiscated. His decades of ornithological work, the documentation of China's birds, the specimen collections, the field notes were taken. He was assigned to clean public lavatories. He did not stop working. In the years that followed, when he was eventually permitted to return to research, Zheng completed what became the definitive reference text on the birds of China, a work still used today. He received recognition from international ornithological communities. He died in 1998. At the age of 91, he was never officially thanked for what he had tried to do in 1958. The sparrow is still there, on rooftops and fields, in city streets, eating grain, eating insects, doing exactly what it has always done, in numbers too large for anyone to count precisely. Most people don't notice it. That's the point. The sparrow doesn't announce itself. It doesn't perform any function that anyone can see from a distance. It sits in the gaps of the world, quiet, ordinary, unremarkable, and keeps things in a balance so subtle that you only discover it was there when it's gone. One man tried to explain this in 1958 with data, with evidence, with autopsies. It cost 15 to 55 million lives to confirm he was right. The sparrow weighed 25 grams. The math, as it turns out, was never as simple as it looked.